Anyone remember video responses? Back in the day when having 100 YouTube subscribers was something to be decently proud of, you could post a video response to someone else and it would show up when watching their video. Back then I was really into the Zelda timeline theory community. Not on this channel, I had a dedicated channel for it where I filmed PowerPoints with a digital camera. It was fun arguing about timeline intricacies. And then Nintendo kind of ruined it by releasing the official timeline. Said official timeline being honestly kind of super flawed. I thought the community would reject it, but no, everyone just accepted it as fact, no matter how little sense it made. I mean, come on, you put 3 games and an entire timeline split between Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures? And then all this over here, that's just pushing all of the games that are difficult to place into a timeline where Link just loses for no reason. And what's this? The Oracle Link is the same as A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening? You know, they meet Zelda for the first time in both games. Hell, these titles even have in-game artwork of Link, and he looks completely different. Hey, okay, dialing it back a little. At around the release of Hyrule Historia, for a period covering about 8 years from the release of Phantom Hourglass to Triforce Heroes, Nintendo only wanted to make Zelda games with clear timeline placement. Everything was either a sequel or a distant sequel or a prequel of some sort. Triforce Heroes bucked the trend, but it was kind of not important to anything, and even then you had apparently an anonymous spokesman saying it was the same Link as A Link Between Worlds, even though it's clearly not. Then we got Breath of the Wild, which had no intentional timeline placement. It apparently took place at the end of all timelines, which is kind of silly, but a more non-committal silly than the likes of Spirit Tracks. And then we got Tears of the Kingdom, which for the first time in a long time we had an actual contradiction. Tears of the Kingdom's past section had direct contradiction with previous games by featuring the first King of Hyrule and a new Ganondorf and a new origin for Hyrule. Just a bunch of stuff that doesn't fit with previous games. Nintendo has stopped caring about making games with a timeline in mind, and that's a great thing. It's not that there aren't explanations for these things, but the game doesn't care about them. Which means it's time for the fans to step in. And so I recently reviewed Swag Masta's I Fixed the Timeline video. Honestly, I was kind of hoping there would be a resurgence in Hyrule timeline theory, and he had some similar issues with the official timeline that I do. The downfall timeline is silly, and Breath of the Wild being at the end of all timelines doesn't make a ton of sense. But I have major issues about his timeline because it's basically this. He speculates an additional split timeline as a result of time travel in Skyward Sword. I don't think this is what Skyward Sword was going for with its story. Seems like everything in the main story is a stable time loop. They even use the term predestined, but it also contradicts its time travel, so I'm good with just ignoring the narrative themes in favor of timeline speculation. But I think Mr. Swag doesn't go far enough. So, working off his idea that Skyward Sword is a timeline split, here's my 2024 Zelda timeline, subject to change with the release of future games. I'll be focusing on 2 things throughout this timeline. The status of the Triforce at the end of each game, and the status of Ganondorf at the end of each game. Furthermore, I'm going to say there is only one Ganondorf. You might think this is solidly contradicted by the games, but I think I might be able to convince you. This is the one Ganon timeline theory. So, there's about 20 games in the Zelda series, but about half of them are irrelevant. Nothing of note in the grander scope happens during Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask, Phantom Hourglass, or especially Triforce Heroes. We also know that Zelda 2 happens after the first Zelda, and that Tears of the Kingdom happens after Breath of the Wild. Both of these are direct sequels, while A Link Between Worlds and Spirit Tracks are distant sequels. There are also some historic eras we need to factor in. They are the past of Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, and the backstory of Zelda 2. So all that means is that we have 13 continuities on the timeline to sort out. Zelda 2's backstory, the NES games, A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, Ocarina of Time, the Oracle games, Four Swords and Four Swords Adventure, the Wind Waker and Spirit Tracks, the Minish Cap, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword's Past, Skyward Sword's Present, Tears of the Kingdom's Zelda segments, and finally the Switch games proper. We're going to start with Skyward Sword. Now, it's made clear in Skyward Sword that a history existed prior to the era we see. We see the ancient robots and the like, so it wouldn't be impossible for a game to exist there, especially with Tears of the Kingdom bringing back these robot ideas. However, nothing really fits. Even if not all of the games mention the Triforce, they always mention Hyrule in some fashion. Skyward Sword was designed as the first game, and it fits as the first game. Of course, we have Skyward Sword's past and future times, so 2 spots go in the timeline. Sometime after Link and Zelda return to the surface, we get Ocarina of Time with the birth of Ganondorf. The story begins with the Triforce united and ends with split into 3 pieces, in both the child and adult timelines. If anyone still doubts the child and adult timelines, then I admire your contrarianism, but we do see both timelines existing in the credits of the game. And of course, the timeline splits into The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, which I think people are pretty accepted about. And of course, the follow-up to The Wind Waker is Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Twilight Princess has a Link's crossbow training, if you care to put that there, but yeah, it's as irrelevant as Triforce Heroes. Now we go back to the start of our timeline, to the ancient time of Skyward Sword. Here, Demise in the past is destroyed by Link. This results in the founding of Hyrule thousands of years earlier compared to the other timeline. We begin this timeline with the backstory of Zelda 2. The Triforce remained united in Skyloft, which had no reason to remain Skyborn, returns to Earth. The King of Hyrule uses the Triforce to usher in a golden age, and when he dies, knowledge of the Triforce is lost, and it remains so for a long time in this timeline. After that, we have the events of the Minish Cap, the rise of Vati. What follows are both of the Four Swords games and the birth of Ganondorf on this timeline. He steals the trident from the Zonai Pyramid and uses it for the rest of this timeline, but eventually ends the game sealed away. He does escape, leading to the original Zelda on the NES. This is by far the Ganon we know the least about. We don't know where he comes from, whether he was born within the vicinity of the game, revived from death, or broke out of a seal. In lieu of any information at all, breaking out of a seal placed on him in Four Swords is as good as anything. By this point, however, knowledge of the Triforce has re-emerged and led to infighting across the world. Ganon successfully manages to obtain the Triforce of Power, while the royal family of Hyrule has the Triforce of Wisdom. The conflict ends with Ganon's death, and in Zelda 2, Link obtains the Triforce of Courage. Even though Ganon is dead, his followers remain and they seek to revive him, leading to Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, and Twinrova's plot to resurrect him. This follows a long-running thread throughout the games, as we see Deku worshipping Ganon in Four Swords Adventures, and have his followers try to revive him in Zelda 2 using Link's blood. And it finally comes to a head here in the Oracle games with Twinrova's successful plot using a dark ritual. What happens to Ganon afterwards? We don't really know. He explodes on screen, but Onyx and Viren both did that too and survived it during the first phases of their boss fights. So I think Ganon manages to escape and sees the Triforce again, because it's apparently just sitting there unguarded after the NES games. Due to the madness he underwent in the Oracle games, his heart is neither balanced nor distinctly unbalanced, resulting in him getting trapped in the Sacred Realm, but unable to use the Triforce. Eventually, he regains his intelligence and manages to send a part of him to the Light World, where we get the events of A Link to the Past. I think A Link to the Past being late on the timeline makes a lot of sense. Despite the localized name, it feels a lot like it's later in Hyrule's history. The Hylians as a distinct people group are almost gone, and their language is virtually extinct. We also get confirmation that Ganon is completely destroyed at the end of the game, phrased like there's no coming back. Yuga later does steal his power, but Ganon himself stays dead. Now only one set of games remain, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, with the most recent of them bringing us the third story that depicts Ganon's birth, as a Gerudo male called Ganondorf. So when does this take place? In its own branched timeline. Because you see, in Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda travels back in time, meaning if we're following those rules, we get another timeline split. There's a version of events where Rauru fights Ganondorf with Zelda's help, and a version where he fights without Zelda's help. The version with Zelda's help eventually leads to Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. But what happens in a version where Zelda doesn't help him? I posit that the version of events is Ocarina of Time. It actually matches up quite nicely. We see a recreation of the bowing scene from Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf attacks the kingdom. He utilizes Phantom Ganon. Twin Rover are there, though looking fresher on the Switch. The 7 sages are involved with the same names, though Sage Rauru and King Rauru would have to be different people. We never see the king in Ocarina of Time, so maybe he is a Zonai. Despite the absence of the Mystic Stones in Ocarina of Time, the backstory plot of Tears of the Kingdom is basically the same events. Only with Zelda's help, Ganon never gets the Triforce at all and has to settle for a Mystic Stone instead. The only real issue is the absence of the Rito in Ocarina of Time, but we do see bird people in Ocarina of Time manga. So it's not impossible that they were there and Link just never encountered them. And that's the complete timeline under the one Ganon theory. Ganon is born on a set date in 2 different timelines. 2 separate timelines lead to him having 4 separate deaths. He survived from the dead once and finally killed for good in A Link to the Past. The only major flaw I can see in this timeline is the branch where Demise is killed by the Triforce. He doesn't really have the opportunity to curse Link with an incarnation of his hate, unless the imprisoned form could do it in its final moments. Or Demise was just lying and there is no curse. Ganondorf is just a bad dude out for himself with no supernatural destiny. Well, it's all in good fun. Tell me what you thought of my timeline and if you can spot any holes in it.